The same has been proven for when we endure really hard things in our life. We can endure loss, trauma, and grief, and struggle and adversity, and our levels will dip. But for most human beings, they do recalibrate back to baseline.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We're here today with the one and only Kim Strobel. Kim is a well-known education consultant, speaker, and happiness coach. I'm happy to have her on the show because selfishly, I want to learn from her. How are you?
Thank you, Jorge. I'm happy to be here. I want to learn from you too. I've checked out your website and all that you do. So I think this is going to be a great conversation.
For the audience, I met Kim online on Instagram and she pitched me the idea about discussing the science of happiness on this show. Now I have a little secret I don't tell many people. I can't say that I'm a happy person. I do have moments of happiness, and if I had to describe how I feel, I would say content. I do feel blessed and content about all of the good things and people in my life, but to be honest, it's great that I found success. But what about others who come from my background? What about their success? Also, when I travel out of our country, I see poor children in the street all of the time. It's hard for me personally to say I'm happy knowing people are hurting in the world. So when Kim told me about the science of happiness, I got excited to speak to her. Much respect to you, Kim, and welcome to our show.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a topic that's really important to me, and also understanding really what happiness is and what it isn't, because I do think there's a lot of misinterpretation about what we feel is happiness. And so I can't wait to dive into this topic because it is heavy. And Jorge, I've got a lot of questions too at times still around it, and even the research that proves certain things. There's pieces of me that kind of fight sometimes with the research, but then I also see evidence all around me that the research seems to be on track.
Kim, you're already well known, but give us your backstory. How did you get into education? And what steps did you take to get where you are now as a motivational speaker and happiness coach?
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey for me. When I started college, Jorge, I had a debilitating anxiety disorder at the time, but it went undiagnosed. So from about age 16 till about age 24, I had what we now know is called panic disorder with agoraphobia. And so my life was very limited. I quit college because I was having these episodes. I didn't trust my body and brain to do the simplest of things. I struggled to leave my house, to walk to my mailbox, to drive my car 5 minutes to the grocery store. And this is back in the late 80s and early 90s. And so nobody knew what was wrong with me. It's just that I was having these episodes of intense fear, and they were multiplying. They were happening all day long. And I got to just a really low point in my life where I felt like the inner part of Kim had these like big, bold dreams and this confidence to go out in the world and really do big things. And then I ended up being this young woman who, at times, it felt like young children were functioning better than me. They could go to Walmart and happily go around the aisle away from mommy or daddy. And if I went to Walmart, I had to have my husband with me the whole time, making sure he's right there beside me in case I would have like one of these episodes. That deterred my life in a really big way for a number of years. And yet it is also the very thing, Jorge, that led me to the path that I am on now. So sometimes we get to take the pain of our lives, I think, and turn it into our purpose. But I eventually went back to college. I was working full time, going to college full time, driving 90 minutes back and forth, trying to earn this college degree that I was very driven to attain. Back then, believe it or not, when you got out of college, there were no teaching jobs, Jorge. You couldn't find a teaching job. And so I became a program assistant for a couple of years. Maybe year 3 or 4, I finally landed my first 4th grade classroom. I loved it. I absolutely loved having a core group of students and moving with them through the school year. Of course, there were a lot of challenges and a lot of things that I had to learn. But then I felt called to kind of go into leadership. And so then I went into a curriculum director's job because I was passionate about program curriculum and how to have good instructional teaching practices. And then in 2016, I decided to launch Strobel Education and leave my job as a curriculum director. And I always say that my husband always stands behind me on everything, but that is the one thing that sent him over the cliff. He was just like, Kim, I believe in you, but how are you going to give up this paycheck? What if you don't find people to hire you? Like, what are the financial pieces of this that they're really making me uncomfortable? I just had this very deep knowing that it was 100% what I was supposed to do. So, George, I sent my husband to counseling, got him behind me. We launched on January of 2016. And now, we provide a lot of professional development trainings for teachers. And then I do a lot of the motivational speaking piece. So that's the 30 years condensed in like 4 minutes time.
There's a couple of things here. First, congratulations, Kim. Having a small business that has survived the first year is a big deal. And after 5 years, it's a bigger deal. For folks out there that are interested in entrepreneurship, starting their own business, the data shows that in the first year, 50% of startups fail and 95% fail by the 5th year. So if you're in business after 5 years, you're doing something right. Now, the second thing I see here, which reminds me of an author named Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle is a guy that I would have to say he is the most famous spiritual guru in the world. And he said that when he was young, he was a very sad person, very depressed, high anxiety. And now he's leading all these different people and showing them a way out of unhappiness and into stillness and into being present and being who you are. And he says that a lot of people that you see that are on this path who are totally present, know who they are, know their purpose, are helping other people. These are people that at one time had a rough time. I commend you.
Those statistics, George, scared me to death at the very beginning because I knew them. I read all the books. And so I have to admit, I felt a little bit at ease as each year passed, but I still worry because when it's like you're upholding your end of the financial piece here, and it's like, I'm betting on myself and my team every day. So thank you for that. And I do love Eckhart Tolle, and he is right. I think that sometimes when you've known darkness in your life, as many of your listeners have, or they might be in it right now, it can feel pretty hopeless. But that sometimes it's the very thing that kind of leads you to chase the light as well.
If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
Education is changing. Classrooms look different, and the future demands that our students be equipped for whatever comes their way. Educators play a huge role in helping prepare students for their futures. Defined Learning is a K-12 standards-aligned PBL solution that provides high-quality cross-curricular performance tasks across content areas such as ELA, math, science, social studies, computer science, and more. The hands-on projects are based on real-world situations and allow students to apply their learning. Education is changing. Give students the tools and experiences to recognize their futures and make an incredible impact on the world. Defined, the authority on applied learning.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience, so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have them come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I move around a lot of schools, and we're seeing a huge disconnect. A lot of teachers that have come from non-traditional pathways, especially in the past few years. And so just interactions, expectations is really the first step. All of my teachers, raise your right hand, and please repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my students. All of my administrators, all my directors, all my principals, all my coordinators, raise your hands, please, your right hand, and repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my faculty and staff. Thank you. You're doing a lot of work around the science of happiness. Kim, for someone who doesn't feel happy or understand that there's a science for happiness, how would you break it down for them?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the definition of happiness that we all have is that it's a destination that you finally reach. And in order to get there, you have to kind of jump through these hoops. And so it's like when you finally got the good job, or you have a good paycheck, or you get married, you have kids, you accomplish all of these things. And when you kind of follow that trajectory, then at the end is this like pot of happiness that is waiting for us. And then now you have sort of arrived. And what we know is that is not true for any of us. We're all a mixture of happy and unhappy all of the time. I mean, last week, or this whole month, I think I have like 20 some flights. 90% of them have been delayed. So like I'm extremely unhappy at the airport. My stress levels are super high. I finally make it to my hotel. I don't get a lot of sleep. I wake up the next morning. I'm back to happy because I get to speak in front of thousands of people, and it's my favorite thing to do. I go work out. I feel happy. Then I get a slew of emails and I'm back to unhappy. So just understanding that even throughout the day, we are all a mixture of happy and unhappy. And it's really not a destination that we're going for. It's more like a direction. It's more of understanding that we can all get happier. We can actually raise our baseline, which I do want to talk to you all about. But it's like that I'm fueling some intentional practices towards this idea of feeling more satisfaction, contentment, fulfillment in my life that make up this kind of pot of happiness, so to speak. What's really interesting, George, is that we all have what's called a baseline happiness level. So maybe my baseline happiness level is a little bit lower than yours. So what this means is some good things happen in our lives and our happiness levels go up from that baseline for a period of time, but they almost always return to baseline. So let's say that something really good happens in your life. I don't know, maybe you get a new home and you're excited and your happiness level rises, or you get a new job, or you get a promotion, or whatever, your kid gets into the college they've been dreaming of. Then your happiness level will take a little bump up. And that bump might last 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months, but it's always going to come back to whatever your baseline is. And George, where it gets really interesting is the same has been proven for when we endure really hard things in our life, that we can endure loss and trauma and grief and struggle and adversity, and our levels will dip. But for most human beings, they do recalibrate back to baseline.
Mm. You know something, Kim? When I started speaking and being a coach full time back in 2017, I used to get really nervous and get a lot of anxiety in the beginning. But then once I got going, I did a great job. And then my passion and my excitement took over. And I got a book called Relentless, Going from Good to Great to Unstoppable. It's by Tim Grover. He was Michael Jordan's physical and mental coach. I listened to this book, followed the advice in it. I want to say for about 2 to 3 years before it became a part of me. Later, I discovered that scientifically, there are external factors that can make someone happy. For example, you get some money if you're struggling. That'll make you happy temporarily. You find a new relationship, you get a brand new car, something external. But the way to help yourself is to derive happiness and joy internally by knowing yourself and knowing what you like to do. So I started doing that every day, which in turn had me think about the things that I don't like to do or the things I don't like internally. And then I started to avoid those things as much as possible. That has, I want to say, recalibrated my happiness level and has put me here instead of here.
That's a great explanation of it. And so we have this thing in our brains called hedonic adaptation. It's our ability to adapt. And I always tell people, if it's really cold outside and you come in and you sit next to the fire and you remember how good the fire feels the first couple of minutes, your whole body just feels so good and so warm. But then after a couple minutes, you're kind of done with it, right? Like it doesn't feel as good that you step away. It's because your brain has adapted to it. So the very same thing happens. Like when you get a new house or you get a little bit of money, or none of these things are bad. I live in a beautiful home and I appreciate it very much. But what happens is our brain will then adjust and then it moves the goalpost. And so let's say that you say, well, I'll finally be happy when I have this job and I make this kind of money. So then or it could be something simple like if I could just lose 15 pounds, I'd be happy. But what happens is you achieve that goal and then your brain adjusts to it. And then it goes, oh, now I need to move the goalpost. Now I need to lose 20 pounds to be happy, right? And so our brain just automatically does that as human beings. And so I love what you said, because what that book was teaching you is what I call is following the thing that actually lights you up, which is hard to do because that took a ton of risk for you to leave your job and me to leave my job. Like those feelings the first few years are like so hard to live with. You are scared, but at the same time, you see that the things that fuel you and motivate you are actually the things that you get that propel you forward. And so I do believe that's an entire book in itself for sure. And I'm going to look that one up, by the way. I love that idea of doing those things that light you up. And how do we figure out more of what that is? And that's another whole podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. But you know what, Kim? I like you. I like what you're saying. I think we'll have you back and we'll do a little series on these.
That sounds great.
Now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to communicate better and even deal with social emotional stuff. Like they're having a bad day, a SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab. Kim, online, I always see you in schools. What is the primary message of your coaching work with educators on the science of happiness?
Well, it goes back to understanding that baseline. So why is my baseline maybe a little bit lower than yours or someone else's is higher? And where does our happiness come from? So what we know from Sonia Lubomirski's research is that 50% of our long-term happiness is genetic. It comes from our mom or dad or a mixture of both. And George, when I say this in front of 6,000 people, I will see 80% of the heads drop. And I know they're thinking, I'm so screwed. Like 50%, because some of them, it's so funny to watch the little brains. And I always say, like, I was born to a really loving mother who's loving and nurturing, but her brain is wired to always kind of pick up the negative. It just kind of absorbs that, where my dad is a little bit the opposite. His brain picks up more good than bad. So there's just a genetic tendency to the type of brain that we were born with. And I know that sounds like kind of a lot, 50%, but I want you to hang with me because there's a lot of hope here.
In this day and age, I think we're more prone to negativity, being inclined towards negativity. I reached a point, Kim, I only hang out with people that are happy in life, are content, are operating at their best. If I meet a person and I say, hey, how are you doing? And they say, I'm maintaining, I immediately run away from this person. I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, no, there's an energetic vibration that all of us hold. And I've always said that too. I just don't need, not that I can't be compassionate, but when people have those lower frequency levels of energy where they're always complaining. And I found this in the school too, George. I finally stopped going to the teacher's lounge for lunch because I would leave feeling worse about my job because they were complaining the whole time about this student or that. And we're allowed to have our feelings of discontentment in this profession that can be really hard, but it was so much that it was turning me into kind of this negative person too. So I, like you, I'm pretty self-aware of the people I surround myself with. When we look at the happiness research, what we know is that we can take every external circumstance that a human being has had, George. What kind of home did they grow up in? Did they have money? Did they not have money? Were their parents married or divorced? Like, you can take every external circumstance that a human being has had throughout their life, and you can throw all of that into the pie. And the research says that those things all together only account for about 10% of your long-term happiness.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It's astounding, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I tell people, like, I want to be clear, those of us who might suffer from depression or have these types of illnesses, we know it's going to steal more than 10% because that's a chemical imbalance. That I'm not saying that if you're a depressed person, it should only be stealing 10% of your happiness. And I want to be really clear because there are mental and emotional issues out there that don't really account for this. But what's fascinating is you and I and most human beings have probably felt like our external circumstances have stolen way more than 10% of our happiness for too long. And so what I tell people is, obviously, if my husband that I love and adore decides he's leaving me tomorrow, of course, more than 10% of my happiness is going to be stolen. But the issue is, George, if 6 months from now or a year from now or 2 years from now, I'm still over there blaming Scott Strobel for what he did to me, then that's really on me. And so I tell people all the time, I'm guilty of this too, because I have let some experiences and some people steal way more than 10% of my happiness for far too long. And what we have to do is understand that's on us. We're choosing it.
A lot of people don't do that, though. They don't know about that. One of the things that I do to help me out when I'm feeling negative energy from someone who I care about, I've trained myself where if I don't know the person, if we don't have a relationship, it really doesn't bother me. It just rolls off my back. But if it's someone that I deeply care about, they're not communicating. I try to communicate, but if they don't want to communicate, I am a fan of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and those folks. One of the things that they talk about is positive affirmations, speaking positivity into yourself. One of the things that I do every single morning, I look in the mirror and I say to myself, I love you 10 times. And then I tell myself, you are not your past. God has forgiven you. He loves you. Your smile lights up the room. All these different affirmations that are going to put me into a positive state so that when I interact with people, it's always very positive. I try to be assertive, but also very kind to people when I do communicate. I have found that speaking positivity into myself and into other people is a way to not let the negative energy of others affect us.
Well, I think that you're like my soul brother because you're speaking all of my love languages right there. I am also a big fan of the Stoics and the spirituality pieces. I'm currently rereading Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, and trying to glean more work from that because it's hard. But I also write affirmations. I have 10 affirmations that I write every single morning. And I'm kind of laughing a little bit because when you say you look in the mirror and say, I love you, it's amazing how powerful that is. I actually this morning, I actually kissed myself on the arm and said, I love you, Kim. Like I'm thinking how much my body and my brain and my soul, they do so much for me in a day's time. And we can bestow love and kindness and kisses and positive things on everyone else. But why can't we extend that same self-love to ourselves?
There's something that I realized recently. I was watching All American with my wife. There was a couple in the show who actually waited to be together. And my wife looked at me and said, you were worth the wait, George. I said, thank you. The very next day, I was in the gym and I was thinking about it. I had a realization that some people are loved since they were little. And some people have to become great in order to be loved. I realized that I'm the latter. I'm one of those people that had a rough childhood. I wasn't loved immediately. I wasn't loved in the beginning, and I had to accomplish several things, including becoming a father, before I was loved. I've accepted that. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They know that they're not loved, but they don't accept that's reality for some people.
And I would say that you also understand or are understanding that you are deserving of love. You are deserving of it. And so many people, especially when you're not loved as a child in the right way and your needs aren't met, your mental, emotional, physical needs aren't met, many of those people will follow that same path. And I understand that and I have compassion for that because they do have then this inner belief that they are not deserving of goodness in their life. And they begin to attract people in their lives. I always say like people who date somebody who's like not good to them, you'll see that they keep choosing the same partner over and over again, just with a different name and a different body, right? Because they don't have that internal blueprint that understands they're deserving of more. So all this just to say is maybe that is still your work, but it sounds like you also are a recipient of that love. You now accept that love from your wife and your child or your children. You are willing to receive that and know that you are that person.
Yes. And another thing too, I had a major loss over a decade ago. And it was a loss that actually led me to this journey of self-discovery, learning who I am. Eckhart Tolle's work actually, I would say, saved me. I've learned how to accept a major loss, but I've also learned that another one is coming. And the older we get, the more loss we'll encounter. However, if we learn the steps to understand what loss is, heartbreak, setback, failure, fear, anxiety, happiness, all these things, then we're better prepared in the future.
Yes, I was just explaining that to my 24-year-old son. He graduated from college last year and he moved from Indiana, which is where we live, to Boston. And he's a super high functioning young 24-year-old, but he was telling me recently, Mom, I feel like I'm struggling just a little bit. I really miss home. I miss the Midwest. This is a little difficult. I'm okay. I'm just sharing with you that it's hard for me right now. And he was worried about telling his mom that because he doesn't want his mom to worry. And I said, you know what? Of course, it hurts my heart that you're having these heavy feelings right now. but I know enough about life to know that we are going to have these kind of times in our life where the struggle becomes real. While I want my son to be happy, I actually more so want my son to have the skill set to know that he can go in the gutter and he can get himself out, right? You can get yourself out, son. And once you do that, you've just built the evidence and the confidence that says, I know how to get through hard things. So when you encounter that again in some other area of your life, while it will be difficult, you've gained a skill set from having the ability to do that. And so when we're even talking about happiness, I, Kim Strobel, still go in the gutter big time at times, but I do have a skill set now that is part of the foundation of my core being that gets me out of the gutter quicker.
Folks, you have a phenomenal coach and person here. I advise you to look into Kim if you need some leadership skills around the science of happiness. Kim, tell us about your book, Teach Happy, Small Steps to Big Joy, and what readers need to know before diving in.
Yeah, well, so Teach Happy is the book that I wrote that is the blueprint for that 40%. It tells you how to get 40% happier, even when your job is overwhelming and stressful and you have a million other things that you're trying to juggle. Teach Happy is really the blueprint that says, you want to get 40% happier? I'm going to show you the teeny tiny steps that are going to help you do that.
What a perfect way to end the show. Kim, how can people find you so they can book you to speak at their conference, school, or event?
Thank you. You can just go to strobeleducation.com and you can find everything you need there. And on Instagram, I'm at Kim Strobel Joy.
That's it for this episode. Until next time, this is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast.
Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do, you model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.